is a hero, he walks with night. His spirit's beauty, his soul is right. His name is man, his face is black, and he would die for you to get your freedom back. He lives with danger, he lives with fear. He knows of chains, that's how he came here. His life is hard, you know the facts, yet still he died for you to get your freedom back. When will you decide to know him, to show him that you understand? It's the least that you can say to the man as he passes your way. You tell him easy, you said behave, and yet you can't see that you're a slave. He asks your help, no answer back to a man who died to get your freedom back. When will you decide to know him, to show him that you understand? It's the least that you can say to the man as he passes your way. You tell him easy, you say behave, and yet you can't see that you're a slave. He asks your help, no answer back to a man who died to get your freedom back.
Following the far-right military dictatorship taking power through a coup in 1980 in Turkey, most of the PKK's top leadership who hadn't crossed into Syria and Lebanon were arrested and brutally tortured. Sakina Cansız, a party founder and the party's first female member, recounts some of the horrors of this torture inside Diyarbakir military prison in her book, Sara, My Whole Life Was a Struggle. The conditions were absolutely horrific inside the prison, as the Turkish state aimed to break the will of the party leadership early on, attempting to force them to renounce their Kurdishness and political beliefs through pure bodily and psychological torture. After 3 years of misery inside the prisons, yet also 3 years of much of the party leadership sticking together, Mazlum Doğan famously took an action starting the resistance that would capture the hearts of so many Kurdish and even Turkish dissident populations. Using 3 matches and a wooden table in his cell, he set himself on fire on the symbolic day Newroz, the Kurdish New Year, March 21st, 1982, and left behind the message, "Surrender is betrayal. Resistance brings victory." What followed was a mass choice of resistance to stop the torture and protect each other that included the self-immolation of 4 more imprisoned PKK members and death-fast hunger strikes lasting from 55 to 65 days that took the lives of 4 top leaders of the PKK, both Kurdish and Turkish, Kemal Pır, Harit Durmuş, Akif Yilmaz, and Ali Çiçek. Kemal Pır summed up the spirit of their actions, saying, "I love life so much that I am willing to die for it." Despite the deaths, the self-sacrificing actions garnered widespread popular support, and Sakina Cansız's role in the resistance convinced many women to join the PKK. The horror and resistance of Diyarbakir military prison is vividly and powerfully captured in the film 14 Temmuz, July 14th. State repression of Kurds. The 1990s saw the destruction of 4,000 Kurdish villages, the displacement of 3 million people, and the formation of a massive Kurdish diaspora across Europe. International states supported these actions and teamed up to cut the freedom movement off at its head, with the MIT, Turkish intelligence, and CIA arresting the Kurdistan Workers' Party's leader, Abdullah Öcalan, in Kenya. The United States took an approach to Kurds that was the same as the one they took to the Black Freedom Movement in the US, dividing the populations into good and bad, so that each regime could say they aren't against all minorities, just bad apples and outside agitators among them. Good Kurds. Kurds who want their communities open to international investment, who are pro-capitalist, conservative, open to being a bulwark against the US's enemies at any given time, i.e. the Kurdistan Democratic Party and the Patriotic Union Party in Bashar Iraqi Kurdistan, who gained their autonomy as part of the US war with Iraq in 1991. As I record this, the KDP has deployed troops to Ziniwerte to, as they say it, enforce social distancing during the COVID-19 pandemic. But the PUK argues that it is a power grab by the KDP. Just because the US sees both parties as good Kurds doesn't mean they always get along. In fact, they hold a relatively tenuous joint governorship over the Kurdistan regional government and fought a civil war in the 1990s. The PKK, for their part, sees both parties as trying to help Turkey push out the PKK from Iraqi Kurdistan, and of course sees any inter-Kurdish conflict as a huge boost to Turkey's domination over the Kurdish people. And they have good reason to think this. When the PKK set up a post in Ziniwerte to encourage de-escalating the bubbling conflict, they were immediately bombed by Turkey. The KDP-PUK parties have also allowed dozens of Turkish bases to exist in Iraqi Kurdistan for quite some time now, and have, in the past, teamed up actively with Turkey to fight the PKK. Yes, once again, tons of acronyms and very confusing. Kurds fighting Kurds, Turkey fighting Kurds, but it all starts to make sense when you compare the interests of these different groups. Bad Kurds: anti-capitalist, question and seeking independence from the neoliberal order, and not open to being a puppet. This generally refers to the PKK and any party with similar ideologies to the PKK, although the US is willing to work with some of them from time to time on joint interests, say fighting ISIS, while still putting out bounties on their heads, literally. Quote-unquote, good blacks: patriotic, assimilating, strictly nonviolent, and non-disruptive, advocating change through legal and institutional means. While MLK was alive, he was definitely considered one of the bad blacks, though the government was open to negotiating with him, unlike other black militant factions. The FBI attempted to convince him to kill himself, but after his death, his legacy has been rewritten and the history books only focus on his "I have a dream" speech, and not his arguments against capitalism and militarism, the two other of his three evils alongside racism. In fact, he is now used as an example of a good black in order to shame and belittle anyone who doesn't meet the extremely sanitized version of MLK that is taught in schools. Bad blacks: disruptive of the status quo, advocating a diversity of tactics, open to armed community self-defense or armed struggle, questioning the doctrine of nonviolence for the sake of moral purity, questioning the institutional structures of the current state, wanting autonomy and self-governance in their communities and economic structures, questioning capitalism. Elements of this can apply to the Black Panther Party or Malcolm X, but even the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, or sometimes MLK himself. What is important to note about these frameworks from the United States government is that they are all liable to shift. But back to learning more about how states specifically repress Kurds. Through all four parts of Kurdistan, any Kurdish resistance was brutally attacked by the state. The Syrian regime was fine with the PKK and its borders if the sole focus of the resistance was to Turkey, but never being limited to the borders they saw as illegitimate and imposed on them. The Kurdish Freedom Movement organized in Syria, Rojava, too, and many of their organizers were imprisoned there, including Abdullah Öcalan, who was later released. At the end of the Gulf War, the United States encouraged Kurds in Iraqi Kurdistan, Bashur, to rise up, and they did. But the U.S. soon turned their back on them, leaving them to be slaughtered in mass reprisals by the Saddam regime. Before that, Saddam's regime committed the worst massacre of civilians with chemical weapons in history on the Kurds of Halabja, killing 5,000 people indiscriminately with cyanide and mustard gas in some of the most atrocious scenes ever seen. And throughout Iranian Kurdistan, Rojava, even the slightest Kurdish resistance is met with public executions and mass reprisals. Kurds are regularly hanged from cranes for everyone to see as a warning of what it means to be openly Kurdish and wanting to live freely. In fact, just today, I saw the reports of at least 4 people being hanged in the past 3 days in an Iranian prison. State repression of black organizing. Since the Black Panther Party's beginnings, they had been under the watchful eye of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. The FBI was no stranger to breaking up social movements. In fact, the Bureau was created specifically to monitor anarchists in 1908. But for the 1960s, COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program, was the FBI's pet project, and it had all the familiar targets in its sights: anybody seeking freedom and autonomy. Anarchism had not seen its real rebirth yet, but the Black Freedom Movement had also been an early enemy of the Bureau. The project was secret, but like with the United States government's attitudes towards Kurds, COINTELPRO classified good or legitimate blacks and bad or outside agitator blacks and their allies, and sought to forcefully drive a wedge between those sides. Even the sections of the Black Freedom Movement it was willing to publicly communicate with, it was secretly undermining. As I mentioned before, they were responsible for sending Martin Luther King Jr. a letter telling him to kill himself. All efforts towards black self-determination, nonviolent or open to using force, were dangerous to the FBI. I'm going to play some audio from the documentary The Black Panther Party, Vanguard of the Revolution, that sums up the FBI's targeting of the Black Panther Party. In it, you'll hear from, in their respective order, Jeff Haas, an attorney for the Black Panther Party, M. Wesley Swearingen, an FBI agent, a voice actor reading Hoover's words in various internal FBI memos, historian Scott Brown, chapter leader Erica Huggins, Central Committee member Landon Williams, FBI informant William O'Neill, and Beverly Gage, historian.
Hoover saw any form of black organizing as a threat to the status quo as he saw it. Change that would have involved equality, that would have put power in black people's hands, was very much a threat to Hoover. He started something called COINTELPRO, directed against what he called black nationalist hate groups.
COINTELPRO was the abbreviation of Counterintelligence Program.
The purpose of this new counterintelligence endeavor is to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalists.
Neutralize could mean making somebody an informant, or putting somebody in jail, or having somebody killed. Hoover was sending letters to various offices almost on a weekly basis to come up with new ideas to go after members of the Black Panther Party.
"245 of the 290 COINTELPRO actions were against the Black Panthers. One of the mandates was, do not make this program public. Do not tell anybody that it exists.
FBI has a memo that states the objectives of counterintelligence operations. One is to prevent the rise of what they call the Black Messiah, a single charismatic leader that could unify the movement. They want to prevent the appeal of radical political movement to black youth.
And they wanted to isolate these groups to prevent them from gaining respectability in the black community.
And they were very explicit in stating these goals.
We were followed every day. We were harassed. Our phones were tapped. Our families were harassed. My parents were both visited by the FBI.
We must create suspicion with respect to their respective spouses, and your imagination and resourcefulness must be employed in order for the Bureau to be successful.
They would send letters to my wife, and the letters would say that Landon is sleeping with this woman, or sleeping with that woman, or sleeping with the other woman. Then when I got arrested, the FBI came to me and said, look, we got all this evidence, all these people are gonna flip and turn on you. We're gonna execute you, because we got you now. We're gonna execute you. But if you will be an informant for us, then we'll let you go.
My recruitment by the FBI was very efficient, very simple, really. I'd stolen a car and went joyriding over the state limit, and they had a potential case against me, and I was looking for an opportunity to work it off. And a couple of months later, that opportunity came when FBI agent Roy Mitchell asked me to go down to the local office of the Black Panther Party and try to gain membership.
The FBI wanted to destroy the Panthers. They absolutely saw the Panthers as the vanguard of a very, very threatening and violent revolutionary movement. They absolutely wanted this organization to be destroyed.
Fred Hampton of the Chicago chapter was probably the radical who made the most impact in the shortest amount of time in the state's estimation. With his influence, the Black Panthers were shifting from black nationalism to revolutionary internationalism. They were expanding their circle and making common cause with poor whites and Puerto Ricans, uniting street gangs, and breaking down the barriers that prevented shared action against oppression. This was the greatest threat to the ruling powers. Here's Fred Hampton himself, followed by Mike Klonsky, a white member of the Students for a Democratic Society, Fred again talking to white students. Then you'll hear Michael McCarty, another Panther, and a meeting between working-class Appalachian white folks and some Black Panther members. Following up some back and forth at the meeting, you'll hear commentary by Landon Williams again. And finally, Mike Klonsky once more.
We say white power to white people. White power. Brown power to brown people. Brown. Yellow power to yellow people. Yellow. Black power to black people. We say Panther power to the Vanguard Party.
A lot of us thought that we were on the eve of a revolutionary situation here in the United States. We used to call the Panther Party the vanguard of the movement because they were out in the forefront. They were kind of setting the pathway. The things that we would face some repression for, they would face it 10 times as great. They were sacrificing oftentimes their lives in the struggle.
And these people in this class have divided themselves. They say, I'm black and I hate white people. I'm white and I hate black people. I'm Latin American and I hate hillbillies. I'm hillbilly and I hate Indians. So we fight amongst each other.
Fred Hampton here in Chicago was the main voice for racial unity.
The Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We don't think you fight fire with fire best. We think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity.
We worked with organizations such as the Young Lords, a Puerto Rican street gang that had become political, and the Young Patriots, hillbillies, Appalachian white boys.
I want to introduce a man who come over tonight from another part of town, but he's fighting for some of the same causes we're fighting for.
Bob Lee, who was our deputy field marshal, had a meeting with them, and he was explaining why we should work together.
That police brutality up here, there's rats and roaches. There's poverty up here. That's the first thing that we can unite on. That's the common thing we have, man. But I want you people to stick together, and I'll stick with Black Panthers, and they'll stick with me, and I know they will.
The coalition that Fred was building in Chicago represented the Latinos, the poor whites, and poor blacks, but also because he had been in the NAACP, he had linkages with folks who were in the congregations, or church folks, and with working class folks. So Fred was building a broad-based coalition in Chicago, and that was the threat.
J. Edgar Hoover most feared young whites uniting with the black struggle. And he was most afraid of what he called a black messiah rising up out of this movement.
The FBI and the Chicago Police Department were both monitoring Fred Hampton and coordinating their activities against him. You can probably imagine what happened next if you don't know already.
This cop stepped to the door with a submachine gun, and all you could see was a silhouette. And the muzzle flashes as he fired, a fully automatic weapon into a room that was barely 6 feet wide.
That was Panther Blair Anderson speaking as part of the Vanguard of the Revolution documentary, summing up the assassination of Fred Hampton over grisly images of the scene. It is clear why the Black Panther Party came under such heavy repression from the state. The American government had always feared black people with guns. That's why they banned firearms for free blacks for most of their history. That's why they so forcefully had to destroy John Brown for attempting to arm black slaves, and to destroy his reputation in all the history textbooks as crazy and fanatical and a terrorist, even while they have to concede his intentions were good. The state also requires a monopoly on legitimate force. If an armed black organization was seen by everyday people as legitimately standing for their interests, then that monopoly comes into question. And of course, states always want to portray themselves as the only ones that can protect and provide services to the people within their borders. This is the foundation of their social contract that is taught in every school to legitimize the state to new generations. Obviously, we all know deep down that there was never an actual meeting where all the people came together and agreed to give up some of their liberties in exchange for protection from the government. But state power depends on us perpetuating that story, whether in the United States, Turkey, Iran, or anywhere else where states are in control. When the Black Panthers were organizing their own autonomous institutions to meet people's needs, that old story became contrary to people's lived experiences. The FBI wanted to stop that from spreading, or people would begin questioning the Bureau first, and then soon the whole foundations of statecraft. Some people will try to argue that the Black Panthers are responsible for their own repression for their hyper-militant language and appearance. It is clear that even if they wore suits and kissed white babies, they would have been seen as dangerous all the same. One could make the argument that, from a strategic perspective, the Panthers made several mistakes that could have quickened the state's eye. One could say that the militant rhetoric and chanting was overdone and that their capacity for community self-defense should have been emphasized but not glorified. One could say that sometimes the Panthers engaged in fights, sometimes physical, that they couldn't win, and that they could have benefited from some strategic withdrawals, choosing the time and place in which to make themselves known, instead of risking long prison sentences for defending party offices that could always be reopened elsewhere. All of these strategic criticisms have some merit, but no matter what the Panthers did, if they built autonomy and self-defense capability for themselves in any fashion, they were going to attract attention and repression. This repression was probably the biggest factor in their downfall, but was unavoidable. They could have taken more steps to insulate themselves from the reach of that repression, to make themselves more resilient from inevitable police pressure, but they could not have flown under the radar. In 1971, after the New African Peoples Movement founded a new community in Mississippi with El Malik as their provisional capital, FBI crackdowns rapidly increased and their offices were raided. These raids culminated in a shootout that left the police officer dead. The movement had already attracted the surveillance of COINTELPRO for its secessionist activities, but this incident led to a dramatic uptick in arrests and imprisonments that would force a new approach in the following decades.
Dağlardan denizlere hey esen deli rüzgarız. Eğilmez hiç başımız hey yenilmez yüreğimiz.
Dağlardan denizlere hey esen deli rüzgarız. Eğilmez hiç başımız hey yenilmez yüreğimiz.
Faşizmi yıkacağız, tecridi kıracağız. Özgür Kürdistan'da hey güneşe varacağız. Faşizmi yıkacağız, tecridi kıracağız. Özgür Kürdistan'da hey güneşe varacağız.
Autonomous structures in the Kurdish movement. So if you've been following me since the first episode, you'll remember I briefly mentioned the ideological shift of the PKK from traditional Marxist party to a party with a more homegrown message, democratic confederalism. Whereas Marxism focused on centralized organization and the creation of entities that could successfully participate in statecraft, democratic confederalism takes a more bottom-up, non-hierarchical approach, preferring to build counter-institutions to state power that meet the needs of people, allow people to govern their own lives, and further their distance from the state's control-hungry tendrils. That ideological shift has set the movement down a different path, one with a varied fabric of autonomous structures marking out the terrain. The Kurdish Freedom Movement now has as its most basic level the communes and assemblies, which are directly democratic bodies that bring people together to govern themselves at the most local level. These communes and assemblies are linked together by elected and recallable mouthpieces, but the real power flows from the bottom up. Most of the practical work happens in committees open to everyone living in their jurisdiction, covering areas such as defense, health, conciliation, economy, education, youth, and women. I go into great detail about the work of most of these committees in a documentary of mine, The Communes of Rojava, but here I will just state some of the structures arising from these committees that further the autonomous capabilities of the people throughout Kurdistan and go further toward making the state and capitalism obsolete in their lives. Like the Black Panther Party, Kurds felt the immediate need to form their own self-defense structures to protect themselves both from the state and from antisocial behavior internally that the state ignored. Also, like the Panthers, they have always seen the need for armed self-defense. As they started to gain more autonomy in their communities, with their penchant for decentralization and participatory politics guiding them, they knew they had to organize the society to defend itself. In addition to their large-scale militias and guerrillas, on the most local level, they have created security forces that are directly accountable to the people, unlike the police of the state. They have done this, especially in Rojava, by electing 2 male and female security members from each commune, representing about 100 families. These security members can only act as democratically mandated by the members of the communes, and can be immediately recalled if they violate that mandate. They are also trained in subjects like women's freedom and democratic confederalism well before they ever touch a weapon, and the roles rotate frequently with the goal of eventually training everyone and making their own forces redundant. The Justice Committees work together with the Defense Committee, as is to be expected, but the movement has had a long focus on reconciliation and restorative justice rather than punishment. The commune-level committees in 2016 successfully mediated 80% of cases in Rojava before they ever reached a court system. The mediators are elected with at least 40% required to be women. Not only that, but women have their own mediation system specifically for dealing with violence against women. The health committees have set out with the goal to train all commune members on basic first aid and health education, and they often help recover traditional practices of herbal medicine and integrate them with allopathic medicine. They seek to decentralize valuable health knowledge to increase community resilience and autonomy. Communes also come together to form free clinics and hospitals. Education committees hold all sorts of frequent classes for their residents, ranging from practical skills to political education. The autonomous education system that has been self-organized throughout communities where the Kurdish Freedom Movement has influence is deeply invested in making sure that every child can learn in his or her native language, whether Kurdish, Arabic, or Aramaic, to name a few, but also that children learn the languages of their neighbors in order to increase the harmony among them. Teachers are often trained and elected by communes, and they see themselves not as authorities but as equal participants in the sharing of knowledge. The movement in Rojava has even set up its own curriculum, academies, and universities. Economically, the movement has placed priority in forming cooperatives, and especially women's cooperatives. The cooperatives are run democratically by the whole community instead of by bosses or just by those that work there. So that way, the community has a direct say on how the work done affects the lives and environment of the people that live and work there. Cultural centers and clubs are a very crucial part to the movement, and all ethnicities, religions, and cultures are encouraged to self-organize to keep their traditions alive and well. Communities form exchange programs to focus on shared democratic values and learn about each other's cultures. Women's committees are frequently the most well-organized of all, thanks to the self-organizing of women in the movement for increased recognition, autonomy, and participation. The history and practical realities of the women's movement in the Kurdish struggle will be explored in the next episode. Autonomous structures in the Black Freedom Movement. The Black Panther Party's survival programs pending revolution were immensely popular, thorough, and effective at meeting the needs of Black communities and decreasing their dependence on the state, which has never put their interests at heart. In fact, because the federal government felt threatened by the success of the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program, the USDA was forced to step in with its own program that now serves millions of children, but only took off after the Panther program was shut down. In 1972, John Lennon and Yoko Ono were invited to co-host the Merv Griffin Show for a week. They invited Bobby Seale on as a guest, in part to talk about the free breakfast program. In the following audio, you can hear John Lennon introducing Bobby Seale and then Merv Griffin, asking him to describe a film reel of the breakfast. Then, in Vanguard of the Revolution, we can hear party member William Lemieux, writer Rita Williams Garcia, and historian Beverly Gage reflect on the program.
The chairman of the Black Panther Party, and here he is.
We have a film of your breakfast program. Is this without sound also?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Would you comment on this?
Yes, I will. This is a free breakfast children program, and they're preparing the food there early in the morning. It's about 2 hours work in the morning. These party members primarily set this whole program up, and then we involve as many of the community people as we can.
Who all wants here? People in there. Come on in, little brother. Come on in, little sister. Y'all can sit down and get something to eat.
Studies came out saying that children that didn't have a good breakfast in the morning were less attentive at school and less inclined to do well and suffered from fatigue. I mean, there was all sorts of scientific reasons to have a good breakfast in the morning. And we just simply took that information, and a program was developed serving breakfast to children.
After my father came home from Vietnam and was discharged from the Army and couldn't get work, we were going through a very hard time. Food was kind of, just the everyday necessities were hard. I was embarrassed to go, but when you went, kids are all laughing, and then all of a sudden the stigma, or whatever you thought was a stigma, went away, and you really got to see that, yes, this is what the Black Panthers are.
We were showing love for our people. If you have a child, if you know that, hey, these men and women are going to feed my child in the morning, that's a big deal.
The breakfast program actually really caught on. It served about 20,000 meals a week to young people in 19 different communities. So it wasn't a fly-by-night thing. It really actually was making a difference.
The final image in the clip, in black and white, shows Black school children playing on a playground as it pans over along the chain-link fence where a prominent white sign with black lettering says, "Free breakfast for children served here every school day morning from 7:15 a.m. till 8:45 a.m. The famous Black Panther logo adorns the bottom of the sign. That the Black Panther breakfasts were really that much of a threat to the state may seem like a stretch. After all, as a film version of Huey P. Newton argued in a Huey P. Newton story, 2001, nobody can argue with free grits. The program did go a long way towards its intended purpose of changing the narrative on the party away from just violent radicals with guns, but the FBI hated it. Its head, J. Edgar Hoover, saw the breakfast program as potentially the greatest threat to efforts by the authorities to neutralize the Black Panther Party and destroy what it stands for. Presumably for its ability to delegitimize the state while bolstering the image of the community itself as capable of meeting their own needs. Here's Beverly Gage again.
Just at the moment that the Panthers are turning towards survival programs, towards free breakfast programs, free clinics, and free food programs that will help them reconnect with the Black community and build their membership, and repudiating this earlier advocacy of armed self-defense and police patrols. J. Edgar Hoover attacks the Panthers.
While the Black Panthers originally had self-defense in their name, and while they did organized armed citizen patrols to counter police brutality and women's self-defense classes, their activities went well beyond the scope of defense. The Kurdish Freedom Movement actually sees self-defense as going well beyond just physical defense, and includes any way that society protects its values and autonomy. According to that definition, Black Panther activities like their free legal aid and education programs, and their intercommunal youth institute that developed critical thinkers could be termed self-defense too. Their Seniors Against a Fearful Environment, SAFE program, provided free transportation to senior citizens around their headquarters for errands like cashing pension and social security checks at community banks. Their goals for this program were much more expansive, but I'm unsure whether they met these goals. Goals. 1. Provide round-the-clock transportation services to senior citizens in Alameda County, and at no cost to low-income elderly residents who otherwise would have no means of transport to do vital shopping, to keep medical appointments and other necessary commitments. 2. Provide delivery services of life-sustaining food, medical prescriptions, and medicines. 3. Provide assistance in moving household furnishings within Alameda County at no cost to low-income persons. 4. Provide an escort for senior citizens as they walk to and from recreational, entertainment, and social facilities and activities in order to prevent assaults against and robberies of elderly persons. 5. Encourage a spirit of respect for and concern about the special needs of the elderly through the presentation of educational programs and the distribution of educational and scientific materials. Like the communes do in areas influenced by the Kurdish movement, the Panthers led community health classes and opened medical clinics, with at least 13 known. A majorly innovative program was their Sickle Cell Anemia Research Foundation, which was immensely successful at increasing scientific understanding about a disease that had been understudied because it primarily affected people of African descent. They added to their health infrastructure by opening free dental and optometry programs, and a free ambulance program that skipped time-consuming checks into patients' finances.
Where you have inadequate medical service, we saw the basic need for free medical service, and we worked hard and worked over long periods of time in order to make that a reality. Now, up to this day in the Black community, you have doctors there who are more concerned with private wealth rather than public health. The concept behind the medical center is that we would take the profit out of the medical profession. Our medical center is a direct result of the basic need in the Black community for a free medical service.
You had this done about 3 days ago, you said? This is not the burned hand. This is another one. Oh, okay.
Does it feel painful? No, it's not painful. Like it's infected and everything? No, it's not painful. It's good. Looks good, yeah.
We got doctors for every day this week. Next week we got... No, we need one for next Thursday.
Come to the clinic tomorrow for an appointment.
What are the chances of getting an ambulance, huh? If we can buy an ambulance, that's about the best chance. What about... the idea is all right, but the idea is all right, but we just have to have money to get an ambulance.
Well, how much, can't you use ambulance?
Yes. I tell you, I'm going to bring a couple of pharmacists from the hospital where I am. They want to come out and see it, and they're interested in working, you know.
We can have patients come through, see a doctor. After they get through, get a test or what have you, then they comes in and see the people's advocate. That's a community person or person in the party who acts like a liaison between the center here itself and the community. He asks them what type of service they thought they got here in the center, any other criticism of the medical center itself. It's also to deal with problems outside medical problems, The People's Advocate has a resource file. In this file, we have teachers, sociologists, speech therapists, social workers. This is all part of the resource file.
The Panthers provided food needs beyond their Free Breakfast for Children program with their Food Cooperative program and Free Food program. They even built shoe factories to make and distribute shoes and clothing. They wanted to build resilience beyond just charity, so they provided job-finding services and opened cooperative housing units. Yet it should be stressed that the Black Panther Party's programs were sometimes filling a need that was both strategically in the interest of the party and the federal government to have filled. When the federal government found a party program better than what they could provide, they sometimes provided aid to that program. One can argue whether they legitimately wanted to be helpful or just to take some credit for an idea they couldn't implement better themselves. But sectors of the federal government were willing to provide money to party programs, and the Panthers used this money strategically. David Hilliard, BPP Chief of Staff, wrote in his book, The Black Panther Party Service to the People Programs, that government aid was a requirement for their housing cooperative program, but seems to dispel the idea that the state reached out to them with funds willingly. Instead, he noted the need for strong community agitation and organization to force the government into fulfilling their legal obligations. The survival programs eventually caused division in the movement, as some of the leadership believed that the programs had become not much more than social services and weren't integral to the revolution. After his release from prison, Huey P. Newton wanted the party to focus on these survival programs, as party member Flores Forbes remembers in the following audio. Eldridge Cleaver, from exile in Algeria, became the most critical voice against them. Kathleen Cleaver, his wife and a major figure in the party, fell into his camp, while Elaine Brown disagreed. Both speak in the clip.
He came out focusing on returning to the survival program, the breakfast program, the free health clinics, free food program, and the sickle cell anemia research program. I remember Huey P. Newton saying, the Black Panther Party was not going to last. He said the organization was going to get destroyed. Based on the way we were very aggressive, and we kind of realized that this wasn't going to last long.
We know those are not revolutionary programs. They're at best survival programs. We know that the people are in jeopardy of genocide, and that if they do not survive, then it won't be possible to bring about revolution.
We were really trying to connect more with the people in the community, and this was a big push, and there was probably some people who were not happy.
We have a Breakfast for Children program, you know, but that's not what the Black Panther Party is all about, you see. I don't agree with saying that the Black Panther Party supports Breakfast for Children, and that's all that we're about, you know. Don't talk about this other thing. The Black Panther Party is for overthrowing the United States government.
Those people who were on the other side of this issue politically did not see the Black Panther Party as a vehicle for social service. We saw it as a vehicle for political transformation, radical change, for revolution. So we couldn't get excited about survival.
Eldridge Cleaver, who, while sitting comfortably in Algeria, was assailing the Black Panther Party as being weak, and it didn't have any more muscle, and it was a reform organization, a Breakfast for Children club, and he denounced the party, and he denounced the chief administrator of the party at that time, who was David Hilliard.
As we'll see, the Kurdish movement's more recent revolutionary strategy of democratic autonomy and the rooting of similar survival programs through the directly democratic commune system have prevented such a divide in Kurdistan. With the transformation of their end goal from takeover of the state to making the state obsolete, the Kurdish movement asserts that the autonomous survival programs are the revolution, as long as they increase the strength of society at the expense of the state. As the top Panther leaders shifted their views of the survival programs to being secondary and of less necessity than political struggle, the pathway was open that would eventually lead the leadership to choose even the potential of low-level state power over the actual autonomous power the rank and file had developed in their communities. Steve McCutcheon of the Baltimore chapter of the party explains the hollowing out of the party's autonomous capacity.
The Panthers decide to call members to Oakland in an effort to run Bobby Seale for mayor of Oakland and Elaine Brown for city council.
John Seale, member of the Central Committee of the Black Panther Party, called me at the Baltimore chapter office and told me to begin closing down all of our programs. So we were instructed to cease and desist all party operations and to bring as many party members from Baltimore out to Oakland as possible.
Ultimately, they roll the die. They assume that if they're successful in this campaign, this might help to transform one American city. This might be the blueprint for the future. But they do roll the die.
The 1972 to 1973 electoral turn was a blow that the autonomous institutions never recovered from.
Look who's here, Punchinella, Punchinella. Look who's here, Punchinella in the shoe.
My name is Kalita Smith. I'm 8.5 years old. I live in Oakland, California.
Oh, we can do it too, Punchinella, Punchinella. We can do it too.
I go to school at the Oakland Community Learning Center.
Punchinella, Punchinella.
My school was started by the Black Panther Party.
And now I'll leave you with a vignette. Ever since she was a young girl, Dağlardan knew for certain she wanted to own a restaurant someday. She would watch her mother cook every day from the age of 6, diligently taking note of every step, and over time categorizing a veritable cookbook in her head. At 12, she made it part of her routine to pluck grape leaves off walls and fence lines on her way home from school, carefully putting them, one on top of the other, between the pages of her notebook for safekeeping. She would stop by the neighbors' gardens and sweet-talk them, and invariably they'd gift her an onion here, some garlic there. She would complete her rounds at the commune, the commune house, and explain her plans to all who would listen, except for anyone who wouldn't promise not to talk to her parents. Maybe she would return home with a bucket or two of rice from the generosity of her neighbors. Maybe another neighbor would even let her use their kitchen. Dağlardan was always drumming up these secret feasts for her family. She wanted to prove her resourcefulness and culinary prowess. When she was in high school, her parents opened up a small restaurant of their own, and she leapt at the chance to work there. At first, it was like a dream come true, but she began to grow increasingly irritated by her parents' micromanaging. I'm going to get out of here and open my own restaurant the first chance I get. There, I'm going to be the boss, and no one will be able to tell me what to do. She never thought of herself as bossy, and she had no strong urge to order others around, but the thought of being on the flip side of control was briefly comforting to her. Comforting, that is, until her friend Zine invited her to come work at another restaurant in the city, where she was told no one would boss her around, but that she couldn't boss anyone around either. Dağlardan had no idea how such a reality could work in the restaurant world, but she agreed to try out the cuisine and sit in on a meeting after hours at her friend's work. A cooperative. She was shocked that it hadn't hit her before. Why did anyone need to order anyone around at a restaurant? Who said there had to be a boss for the work to get done and the people to get fed? Dağlardan watched the deliberations eagerly, just as she had watched her mother cook as a child with a mind craving new knowledge. At one point, as she listened to Zine admit an awkward incident that had been on her conscience, where she had turned someone away for falling slightly short on cash, Dağlardan felt her hand flinch toward the sky as if her arm had beat her brain in a race. She felt ashamed and quickly put it back down. She was just supposed to be spectating. Who was she to jump in? Zine, ever the attentive facilitator, called her out. Dağlardan, there is no reason to be ashamed to contribute. You live in this community, and what we do here affects you too. So you should have a say just the same. Now, what did you have to say? Dağlardan shyly mumbled, well, I just thought... She looked around and noticed the other women of the cooperative were respectfully giving her their undivided attention. She felt a burst of confidence. What if we, what if we allowed people who can't pay to pay in other ways? Surely money isn't the only valuable compensation. What if they volunteered to help us with a task we needed? Or what if they were a ding beige who could sing us a story in return for a meal? Couldn't that be much more meaningful than some lira? Dağlardan was once again self-conscious. She hadn't been able to stop herself from calling the restaurant ours. She apologized, but the other women ignored her and went around affirming her idea until they had consensus. All right then, Zine affirmed. It's settled. Dağlardan felt a feeling of warmness she hadn't felt in a long time. the feeling of having a say, of making a difference. It was a feeling she would be struck with an uncountable number of times working at the women's cooperative restaurant thereafter. She loved each moment she spent inside there, no matter what task she was carrying out. The cooperative empowered her. She felt the restaurant was her baby, but not just hers, all of theirs, and they would nurture it all together. She frankly didn't want to be a part of every meeting, every decision, but what was important was that she had the chance to decide. As Dalal stood in the kitchen and rolled dolmas for the 1000th time in her life, she smiled. With each stuffed grape leaf she served up, she felt she was serving up revolution. Hi, I'm Ian Campbell, also known as Neighbor Democracy. Thank you for listening to episode 3 of Panthers and Guerrillas. In this episode, we started off with The Panther by Elaine Brown, who again was one of the leading women figures in the Black Panther Party, and also a major songwriter as far as Panther anthems go. We come into the middle of the episode with Dağlardan, Denizlere by Awazê, Çiya. That song is in Turkish, but the band is a group of Kurdish guerrillas, actually members of the PKK in the mountains. And the final song was Gerilla by Nûarîn. So stay tuned for next week's episode, which will be Free Women, Free Society. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Çiya, Gerilla, evi yaşayan Gerilla, eş kadına Gerilla. Gerilla, hem Çiya, Gerilla, evi yaşayan Gerilla, eş kadına Gerilla. Çedekin dil o kajiane